Here we have a great explanation by the great Leonard Bernstein about polytonality, dissonance, and ambiguity in art. Check it out.
Well, they were simply those bigger and better ambiguities I promised you last time, those constantly fresheners of tonality, which kept it alive and kept musical progress constantly on the move. Now, for our purposes, the clearest and most concise way to see these tonality fresheners is via the three linguistic modes we've been following throughout these lectures, namely phonology, syntax, and semantics. Remember? Now, obviously, the big phonological strides are to be found in the sharp increase of what used to be called dissonance. In other words, Stravinsky's kind of tonality has acquired some striking new additives, a new dissonantal freedom. But what does this new free dissonance mean? Is it simply an arbitrary use of wrong notes for shock value? Well, certainly not, although the shock element was undeniably a part of this rescue operation. Remember the old battle cry, "Épatez les bourgeois." But the origins of the new dissonance were much more basic than that, and far more serious, premeditated, and organized. As briefly as I can put it, there are two ways of understanding the new dissonance. First, as an expansion of the triadic idea, so that a triad could now be thought of as a seventh chord, for instance, or a ninth chord, or a chord of the 11th, or of the 13th, all making for new tonal dissonances. That's why that Petrushka puppet dance sounds the way it does, right? It's just an extension of triads. But there's a second key to this increase of dissonance to be found in the new concept of polytonality. That is, employing more than one tonality at a time. It's as though tonalism could be saved and freshened by a sort of mitosis, by splitting any given harmony into two or more different and simultaneous ones. And if there are two tonalities, it's called bitonality, and if more than two, it's called polytonality. Simple. Now, musicologists are always pointing to a specific chord in Petrushka as the primal statement of bitonality because it's so clearly analyzable and so dramatically effective. It's this famous chord, which again is only two simple triads, pure triads this time, C major and F sharp major. Now, pure they may be, taken separately, but we know something about that C-F sharp relationship, don't we? Something that instantly explains and clarifies the particular ambivalence of this chord, namely the tritone, that diabolos in musica interval on which you're all experts by now, because it's the same tritone we found in Debussy's Faun, you remember? And in fact on which the whole piece was constructed. And we also found it last time, if you remember, to be a crucial element in Alban Berg's violin concerto. You remember those last four notes of the tone row? Which then appeared in the quoted Bach chorale? Wrong. Sorry, the harmony's wrong. Better. And here is that tritone again, serving a whole new purpose now on these notes to provide that unstable tritonic relationship between two absolutely pure triads, this and this, thus producing a marvelously distinct ambiguity, a perfect musical evocation of the duality in the puppet Petrushka himself, that bundle of sticks and rags concealing a passionate human heart. But bitonality doesn't only serve the exclusive function of producing dualisms. We must also recognize the obvious fact that the combination of two different chords automatically creates a third one, a wholly new phonological entity. For instance, what are those famous primitive boom-booms in the Rite of Spring near the beginning? Now, is that just arbitrary banging, letting the fingers fall where they may? On the contrary, that repeated chord is carefully devised and structured through bitonality. Look how clearly divisible it is into two separate but equal subsidiary chords, one superimposed on the other. And each of them, mind you, is perfectly consonant in itself. The lower one spells out a pure E major triad, or in Stravinsky's orthography, F flat, as you can see, which amounts to the same thing, and the upper chord is a plain old dominant seventh on E flat. Now, each one by itself couldn't be more clearly tonal, right? But together, wild dissonance. Now, this is a wholly new way of looking at tonal harmony, a fresh Stravinskyan way. He then plunges directly into a new bitonality, this time pitting notes of the E-flat seventh chord, the same one, against notes belonging to C major. And together they sound like this. But there's something else going on at the same time. The cellos are plucking notes that outline that old E major triad, so that there are now three simultaneous harmonic entities sounding together. This is now the sound of polytonality. I can't do all that with only two hands, so let's hear it on tape. Another fresh sound, you see, acerbic, needling, like a cold shower, but still and always tonal. Now, of course, polytonality can and does get even more complicated than the mere family gathering of two or three tonal relatives. Do you know that masterpiece from World War I called The Story of a Soldier? L'Histoire du Soldat, a chamber ballet for 7 instruments. If you don't know it, run, don't walk to your nearest record shop and grab it. It's the best cold shower of all. Here's the first phrase of that of the march that opens Histoire du Soldat. Now that's a bit more subtle, polytonally speaking, because there are two instruments playing, as you can see, a cornet and a trombone. Now the cornet by itself is playing this. Now that seems to start in F major, right? It suddenly switches to F minor and cadences abruptly in a totally unexpected E major. Now listen to the whole phrase, which, by the way, starts on a silent downbeat, just to ambiguify us a little further. 1. So, F major, followed by F minor, followed by E major, all in the space of 4 seconds. Now let's see what the trombone is doing down below. 1. D flat major, of all things, with its abrupt cadence in G major, without so much as a by your leave. So Stravinsky has presented us, take it or leave it, with 4 seconds of music that encompass 5 different keys. Talk about bigger and better ambiguities. Going on. Something new, a new ambiguity, a new tonality freshener, only now it's a syntactic one, rhythmic displacement. Did you notice how syntactically broken up that marching tune is? How asymmetrical it is? We might say that this discontinuity of rhythm is a metrical or syntactic counterpart of the polytonality we've been talking about. You understand? We might even call it rhythmic dissonance. My old friend Harold Shapiro used to call it Igor's asymmetry racket, meaning affectionately, of course, in fact, adoringly, that Stravinsky had developed asymmetrical procedure into an art of its own. Where would any Stravinsky piece be without asymmetry? Early works or late works, they all display this revivifying new art. And now that we're in the syntactic department, we can use strong Chomskyan linguistic language again. What Stravinsky does is to take those transformational procedures we discovered weeks ago in Mozart, remember the G minor symphony? Those deep structure deletions and the like, and makes them into new surface structures of their own. It's very much like the cubistic procedures of Braque or Picasso, who see an object through a prism, as it were, and exhibit the resulting optical fragmentation bit by asymmetrical bit. And just so with Stravinsky, all those once hidden deletions and permutations are now on brilliantly lit display right up there on the surface. Let's hear it. And while you're in that record shop, you might as well stock up on Les Noces, which is maybe Stravinsky's greatest work, except for 10 or 12 others. That's how it is with Stravinsky's music. It's like Schubert's songs or Mozart piano concertos. Whichever one you're listening to is the greatest one of all. You listen to the Symphony of Songs. Of course, it's his greatest work, maybe the greatest of the century. And then you listen to Le Sacre du Printemps, same thing. Ah, but Oedipus Rex. What about Thrani? You forgot Histoire du Soldat. It's always the same thing, the greatest. And so it is also with Les Noces, The Wedding, a combination choral, cantata, ballet about a Russian peasant wedding, which I can't tell you about, defies description. Just go listen to it. But let me play a snatch of the opening scene for you, a strangely cruel and hurtful music that accompanies the ritual braiding of the young bride's hair by her girl companions. Now, what makes that so barbarously cruel? It's the same bitonality as in the sacre example, this one, only with the tonalities exchanged. Instead of this dissonance, it's this one. And this acid dissonance is mirrored in the rhythmic dissonance of the irregular meters. You see how this sharply accentuated distortion of meter adds to the feeling of cruelty and pain just as strongly as did the bitonal dissonance. And exactly like that barbaric passage in Le Sacre, where every accent comes at you like a body blow, always hitting when you least expect it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 8, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Left hook, right jab. Of course, these asymmetries are not at all limited to Stravinsky's so-called aggressive works. They can be found just as strikingly in his gentlest, most lyrical pieces, such as Perséphone, or the much later Scène de Ballet, like this simple little passage from Scène de Ballet. I love this. Sounds almost like Mozart, doesn't it? But there's a significant difference between the asymmetries of Mozart and of Stravinsky. The difference, and what a difference, is between phrase structure and motivic structure. Now, I know that's pretty dense language, but I mean by it a very simple thing. That Stravinsky's asymmetrical structures are mainly based on the juggling of motives rather than what you ordinarily think of as melody. In other words, he doesn't juggle themes, but motives. And by motives, I mean simply very brief melodic fragments, concise formations of 2 notes or 3 or 4 notes, which are then subjected to a kind of cubistic treatment, as again in Le Sacre du Printemps. Now, here's a motive, let's call A. Now, here's another motive we'll call B. Now, look how he juggles them. A, B, A, B, A, 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 B, A, A, B, A, B. Again, left to the jaw, right to the belly. But that's as nothing compared to the great sacrificial dance at the end of the ballet, the supreme brutality of all time. Brutal it may be, but fashioned with the precision of a master craftsman. Artisan, remember what we said about artisans. Fashioned out of tiny motivic cells, fragments like this, and like this, and like this. And all these cells are conjoined, embedded, permuted, expanded, and relentlessly repeated, always in different patterns, like jagged pieces of colored glass in some gigantic kaleidoscope. Listen. That's Igor's asymmetry racket in full glory. Now remember, if
great explanation. This is what it's about bitonality and the background from the historical context. Thank you, and I see you next time.